So how you make money in real estate is that over time, if you have $100,000 worth of debt and you put $10,000 down, you have $110,000 of house, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 year, then the house value is going up so that hopefully 5 years from now it's worth $140,000. So the amount of appreciation, I see I'm starting to get a little high there. Hopefully you guys can see that. So 140,000 is the capital gain or the profit. I buy low, sell high. But then also what's going on is you've got your money that you had, which is I think what Isaac pointed out, or you get the down payment back, whoever said that. So you get your 10,000 back, but then you're also paying off your debt. So this is amortization is the word that's used. Amortization is to kill off debt. So you're paying off your debt, housing prices are hopefully going up. And so at the end of the day, your money after year 4 or 5 is this difference between the wedge here. So that vertical distance is your equity. So in terms of making money in real estate, if you get a home equity loan, you're borrowing against that. And that's where I thought maybe Jacob Cotto was going about. If you have an interest-only loan, then this debt is staying fixed, but you still got that much left to be able to borrow against. And so you could pull money, get another loan 4 years from now and pull some of the cash out possibly. So you're building wealth over time through real estate, and normally you're paying off that debt. And so those interest-only loans do not exist anymore, at least for mortgages. Those pretty much went bye-bye as far as I know. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, let's see, chapter 9, other chapter 9 ones before we move on to chapter 10. Marco, go ahead.
So I wrote down, it's on page 89, one of the most destructive products in the financial meltdown was pick-up payment or negative amortization mortgages. So after reading this, like if I'm gonna do any investments, I'm gonna be very careful to weigh the risk that is possible for the future. So I think with these people didn't measure their risk the best way for their investments. So it was very for them.
Yeah, and I would, do you want to add on to that, Lawson? I'll let you add on before I say something.
Yeah, my quote kind of tied into that. It says, if you manage a business, attract all self-made, high net worth individual stakeholders, kind of saying like responsible people.
Yeah. So with Marco's, the risk might have been not possible to measure is what I wanted to say. So because everybody was being fooled by the government and low interest rates, it was certainly difficult even for people who are in finance, like myself, I might add. I was heavy into the real estate industry. You kind of have this false sense of security that real estate prices is normal, that they're going up. And so you don't really appreciate the risk that's going on because there hasn't been any evidence of that being a problem for the last 10 years, right? So if you don't have any evidence of that, then you kind of keep doing business as usual. And so the risk was very difficult to even measure, even by somebody who wanted to measure it. It was difficult to do because regulators didn't seem to be policing it well. The general public, Wall Street, Main Street, you name it, everybody kind of had this illusion that real estate was a good place to be, on top of maybe any other illusions with some financial products, but certainly with real estate. So that was the one thing I wanted to say. You mentioned negative amortization. So what was chat box? What is negative amortization? Since I brought up the word amortization and I didn't realize Allison used negative amortization. What is going on with negative amortization? Where you aren't making any positive payments. Positive to what? Isaac, if you want to add on to that. What else? Anybody else? What's happening? You're only paying part of the interest. Okay, good. So if your interest payment was $900 and you only paid $800, you just added $100 onto your debt, right? So you have to cover the interest payment. If you're making an interest only, then the graph looks like the one that I have here with the red line going across. But if you're making less than interest, then that means your debt is growing. You guys might be having negative amortization pretty closely. What type of loan, let me go to the chat box, see who's first on this. What type of loan might you guys all be getting similar of? Okay, Jacob Caudill read my mind apparently. That was fast. So Jacob Caudill won that one. Okay, and how is it negatively amortizing? You guys, a lot of college students don't even realize this. How are you guys negatively amortizing it potentially? And you might not be doing it now depending on your situation. But yeah, if you are not making payments and you have a deferment, usually the juice is still running. So your student loan debt is actually going up. And a lot of students don't get that. They're like, oh, I don't have to make a payment till a year after I graduate or whatever with a deferment. But the juice is still running. They're still adding whatever interest that you have with your agreement onto the debt. It's just deferred. So you have a deferment plan, not a interest-free plan. So you guys are, most of you are, if you're carrying a student loan debt, you're negatively amortizing that under a lot of those student loan products. It's possible that, you know, maybe there's some weird thing that you don't have that going on, but I would say most students that aren't making payments are negatively amortizing their student loan debt. So you can always throw money at it, but then it's like you guys are caught right in the cycle that these homeowners were. Well, what's the minimum that I have to pay? Oh, zero. Oh, zero works for me. That's great. Yeah, yeah. You start living your life around monthly payments, and then that's a different type of mentality. So, okay. Questions or comments on that with student loans or loans in general? Okay. Last call. I think that pretty much takes care of chapter 9.
Your loans back.
You're off mute, Lawson, if you're thinking you were muted. Didn't think you were trying to talk there. Okay, chapter 10. Who wants to kick off chapter 10? I'm keeping track, by the way, of all the comments from people, so more checks are better than less checks. So, Kayla.
There we go. There was a quote that talked about the leveraging again, and it said that Freddie and Fannie could effectively leverage 50 to 1, and they could even get up to like 1,000 to 1.
Yeah. Yes, so that leverage effect is pretty huge. Jeremiah.
The reason is because they had almost a government guarantee on their debt, page 97.
Okay, so 97 down at the bottom, I have government guarantee. Let me open up the chat box again. Just tell me when you hear, I'll read it to you. However, we could not compete with the federal government. Fannie and Freddie had a government guarantee on their debt. Where does this guarantee come from? Okay, in God we trust, the Federal Reserve. Taxpayers is the one I was looking for, Aaron. Yes, so in general, taxpayers is the government guarantee. The government doesn't have any of its money. And so, yes, they could run to the Federal Reserve to kind of facilitate that. That's true, Jacob. But ultimately, if it comes to roost with to pay their bills, it's going to be the taxpayers. And otherwise, if it is the Federal Reserve, it's through inflation. So we talked about the inflation tax or real tax. You're going to have to pay it. So this government guarantee, some nebulous government doesn't exist out there with piles of gold that they can just dish out and guarantee loans for. It's ultimately taxpayers. Okay, JC, go ahead.
On page 102, it talked about how investment bankers unquestionably made irrational decisions based on pragmatic short-term thinking. This type of thinking often depicted as a lack of integrity, evasion, and arrogance. This brings back again, like Jonathan mentioned in previous chapters, about the short-term short-term thinking and like how people don't think long-term. But sometimes it's based on greed, but greed isn't always negative because there's two sides to greed.
Or greed, I like to think, can be kept in check with competition. That yes, greed's not good, but greed doesn't take advantage of things if there's competition. Jonathan.
Kind of going off what JC said, I think greed is kind of people always doing things in their best intention. So I think, yeah, like you're saying, if it's kept in balance, it will do more good than bad. But I was going to touch on something that Kayla had said. My point was it was made easy for non-traditional mortgage brokers to bypass the mortgage consolidators and sell directly to the GSNEs.
Yes,
So like
for the quasi-government entities and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Lawson.
Yeah, I had a quote here that really just baffled me. Like, it said the destruction of the S&L industry started with President Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 1960s. Johnson wanted to conduct the Vietnam War and simultaneously create the Great Society. He did not want to tax people because taxes were unpopular, so the Fed agreed to print money. So basically with all this, he wanted to spend, and he didn't want to tax. So he's like, well, let's just inflate the crap out of money. That was just kind of baffled me.
Yeah, yeah. What do you got the page number on that? I was trying to glance quickly. I know
96.
that was 96. Okay. Let's see, Liz, you wanted to jump in on that?
Yeah, somebody mentioned earlier about, I think it was JC, about page 102, just talking about like government policy also being misleading all the firms. And then also they wouldn't let actually the markets correct themselves. So that was an important topic that, that this actually chapter mentions, that they just don't let the market, work itself. Like they just have to do stuff even with printing money. Like that's just one other example.
Yeah. Isaac, you want to add on a little bit? Go ahead.
Yeah, and even more with what JC said about they're thinking short term, not long term. On page 100, they were talking about the sell model and how the brokers would talk to the people they were trying to sell a home to, and people who were trying to buy a home were saying, "Oh, we make $70,000 a year," when they actually made 60, and then the broker would be like, "Well, say you make 75, so that way you can get a little bit better of a house." And they were thinking short term and just trying to get the sale there rather than long term, whether these people are going to default on their loans or not.
Yeah, good. Daniel?
Wasn't it Keynes or was it Hayek that said that just letting the market correct itself would be the best thing for economics?
That would be Hayek.
Hayek, so yeah, the
just in general, the less government guy. Yes.
Yeah, so I feel like if the market had done its job there and we had followed that, I think this might have been a little bit better as well, kind of in my opinion type of thing, just because of what we've seen in the past as well with market corrections and stuff.
Yep, good. Liz?
Yeah, I think there was Milton Friedman who also kind of talked about the freedom markets. The free market, sorry. And I actually correlated that to one of the first pages of this chapter, and it basically kind of differ itself from the semi-socialist countries. And I started looking into it, like how do they differ in the lending markets, and I saw that they were actually more independent than the US. So you can see that major difference from both countries.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Other comments, chapter 10. Jacob.
I had a quote from page 98. It says, "But it is interesting to ask why Golden West chose to enter the pick a payment home mortgage business." And the answer is that it could not compete with Freddie and Fannie in the prime mortgage business. So I feel that because of these government businesses, that it really drove away competition just in that specific market and increased stuff in other areas that led to the ultimate failure.
Yeah, that's a really good comment, that you kind of see how the government monopolizing or allowing monopoly power when in fact they're usually anti-monopoly power cause some of these other things to emerge. Yeah. And it kind of, again, an unintended consequence. Okay, I wanted to throw one out to you. So at the bottom of 98, if you guys have your books in front of you or not, I'll just read this last, it's the bottom sentence. It's kind of a long sentence, but it says, this was a much bigger issue for Washington Mutual, Golden West, and the others because they did not have the commercial and industrial lending expertise that BB&T had, and were effectively forced to focus much of their lending activity on the home mortgage business. And this kind of ties into what you were just saying with Fannie and Freddie, both indirectly were primary drivers of high risk home lending. And I think that's a form of crowding out. So I want you to go to the chat box. You guys may or may not remember the notion of crowding out. What does that mean to you? No wrong answers. I don't care what you put on. Don't Google it. Government crowding out. I think that's what he's showing in a lot of these examples is what economists sometimes refer to as the crowding out effect. And the crowding out effect is a little bit more specific, by the way, but I just want to see what your responses are to crowding out. All right, so increasing government intervention, government involvement causes businesses to leave a market. Good, Lawson. Yeah, the leaving the market is part of it, right? Government making it more difficult to join an industry. Perhaps it can be on that flip side too, as far as entering as opposed to usually crowding out is kind of pushing out, but it very well, the pushing out could be I wasn't able to get in. Ditto from Luke. Okay, so apparently stole the thunder right off your lips. You were just left unable to even conceive a thought. So ditto was the easiest thing. People don't get even a shot at doing something that other business has, revolving door type of stuff. Keeping selected firms in a selection of an industry. Good, Eddie, on you know, for either firms allowed to create their own walls can be a form of that. More government making small companies struggle to compete, increasing barriers to entry. Good, Liz. That's classic with kind of principles of microclass and government barriers. So, okay, so none of you had the real classic thing of what crowding out is, but I think it's related to what we've seen here, or it could be related to maybe even what's going on now. But things just seem so out of whack. I'm not sure this matters, but technically crowding out is when the government runs a deficit. Chat box, what does that mean? The government runs a deficit.
They make less money than they earn in taxes.
Than they earn in taxes, good. Okay, so taxes are less than government spending. And so what does that cause them to have to do this year if that was the case in 2021? Let me go to the chat box on this one. Okay, they could increase taxes, but they never do, Luke. That would be a reasonable response that might be there. Print more money, we kind of say that loosely, Jacob, but they technically don't print money. Decrease spending, oh my gosh, Eddie, you guys, I want you guys to start running the government here. So in response to a deficit, you guys are being very logical that we should either increase taxes and or decrease spending, but they never do that. Spending continues to go up. Ah, there, Jonathan, that's NGC, both got it. Notice it's the two foreigners that know how Americans do it. We just borrow in the bond market. Jeremiah, did you want to add on?
No, I was going to say that, but you said go to the
Okay, yeah, no, that's right. That's what I wanted to do, get these guys working their fingers here. All right, so they enter the bond market. So the government goes to the bond market. By them going to the bond market to borrow, what's the effect of that, chat box? What's the effect? We have those supply and demand curves with the bond market, and we kind of modeled that in different ways, either in money and banking. The deficit gets worse. I guess you'd have to add on to that, Isaac, kind of how would it get worse? Because the deficit is just the spending difference between taxes and spending. I think you could build on that answer, but demand for bonds goes up. Good, Aaron. And so what's the effect of the demand for bonds going up? Chat box, anybody can jump in. We borrow more from other countries, trying to pass them back. Price of bonds goes down. Price goes up. Interest rates go down or up? That's the question. So price has got a up. We got prices going down, interest rates going down. So what's happening here?
Money supply goes up.
Money supply goes up.
Well, if the demand for the bonds goes up, doesn't the price go down because people are buying more?
Yeah, so you have to be careful whether you're talking about bond. So if you're using the bond market to kind of rationalize this, then you got to think, was it the supply of bonds or the demand for bonds that's changing? Or if you're using the interest rates, it's the demand and supply of loanable funds. So while you guys think about that, let me draw a couple pictures here.
What was the question again?
So the question is, what happens when the government runs a deficit and has to go run and borrow money? What is, so some people said an increase in this or that, or bond demand or supply, or, so you can analyze this kind of in two different ways. On the graph to the left, let me put on the bond market. So we have a supply and demand for bonds. And this is the equilibrium price of bonds overall for those sorts of bonds. The graph to the right, we've got the loanable funds market. Remember loanable funds from macro class? We're talking about the level of borrowing that's going on in the financial markets, not just government, not just bonds, but all kinds, kind of more general. And so we're measuring the real rate of interest. Chat box, what is the equation for the real rate of interest again? Adjusted for inflation, I wanted an equation, Daniel. Equation, real rate of interest. There we go. Nominal minus expected inflation rate. That's the one used for the expected real rate. So the expected real rate of return is that. And then if it's after the fact, so ex post, then it's the one that JC just put up. The interest rate equals the real rate plus inflation. After you learn what inflation is, you can, after the fact, compute what the real rate of interest was, which would be the nominal rate minus the inflation rate, as Luke just put up there, is the real rate ex post. So when you're ex ante, it looks like Bryce's. Ex ante is what do I expect to make moving forward? You have an expected inflation rate to get the expected real rate. All right, so this is the real inflation rate here. And we have a demand for loanable funds and a supply of loanable funds. And let's pretend that the government actually has a balanced budget, which is kind of a joke. So balanced budget, back to our deficit equation, chat box, what does that mean when you have a balanced budget compared to a deficit? Give me an equation. It'll be a real simple looking equation, but, or you can write it out if you want. Tell me what's going on with a balanced budget. Income from taxes equals spending. Good. So income equals spending. So a balanced budget means G equals T, or T equals G. And so that means that all of the borrowing that's going on in the financial markets is the private sector, right? So all of the borrowing is the private sector. And so if there's, $3 trillion worth of goods being exchanged at an interest rate of 5%, then that is all private sector borrowing going on. Okay, so now if the government runs a deficit, in this graph off to the right, what changes? The demand for loanable funds or the supply of loanable funds? All right, I got supply. So the government is supplying loanable funds to cover their deficit. Is the government borrowing or lending? Oh, Kayla says demand. She's standing out from the crowd. Jacob says demand. Okay, now we're on the demand side, right? So they're trying to borrow funds just like the companies are trying to do. So the demanders of loanable funds are people that want to do borrowing. The supply of loanable funds comes from people that are saving. And so when the government comes in and runs a deficit, what happens to interest rates? Chat box. They increase, right? Now we see it right away. There's going to be upward pressure on the interest rates because G is greater than T with the deficit. So interest rates get pushed up to 7%. And what happens to private borrowing? Does it go up or down, chat box? Private borrowing, it goes down. So now, if we think about this line now really being the private sector, they don't know any better. It's just that interest rates are going up on them, right? And so how do they respond? They borrow less. So now the difference between here and here is the amount of the deficit in terms of dollars. The private sector got crowded out. They're borrowing less because the government jumped in the market, drove interest rates up, and crowded out some of them. Now, back to this picture. Is the government the supplier demanding for bonds? If we're talking about the quantity of bonds being offered on the marketplace, are they supplying bonds or demanding them? They're supplying the bonds, right? I still see a few people hitting the demand button there. You got to remember, this is looking at the quantity of bonds. So President Biden just pulls out a piece of paper and says, hey, I learned about these bond things. We could sure use roughly $1.9 trillion to pay for this COVID business. So he sets out a piece of paper, 1.9 trillion, love Biden. And it's got all the terms. And he says, hey, China, hey, Germany, hey, Americans, anybody want to buy this? I promise I'll pay you back. I can always print off the money later. It'll probably be your babies that have to pay it off anyway. Let's all just put money in our hands. Let's have free education. Let's have free healthcare. Let's get a lot of free stuff here, man. I got this figured out, this economic stuff. So he goes ahead and sells this on the market. So he is clearly supplying more bonds to the market. What happens to price? What happens to the price of bonds? It goes down. So what happens to interest rates? They go up. The inverse relationship between price of bonds and interest rates. So this goes down. So the bond market looks like this. When we characterize it in terms of loanable funds, we're kind of flipping the equation around, that they're demanding funds that are limited out there, the loanable funds. All right, questions or comments on that little rundown of previous classes in a variety of ways? All right, since I brought up the Ricardo-Barrow effect, I guess it's fair to bring up, I'm sorry, as long as I brought up the crowding out effect, we can bring up the Ricardo-Barrow effect. How might some people respond, especially you fiscally sound individual taxpayers? What might you do knowing that these actions by the government are leading to higher interest rates and possibly some future tax liability? What might you do? Chat box. So economists have this theory, yes, that you're going to increase savings for the future. So if you start saving some of your money, then now the loanable funds shifts to the right and could somewhat offset this effect. All of the empirical studies have shown that it's not offsetting it completely. So it's not like the crowding out goes away because people are, figuring out their future tax liability. But there's some evidence that they do increase their savings behavior a little bit. And so that makes the interest rate maybe not go up to 7%, but up a little bit, maybe something less than 7. So once we have the savings effect taken into place. And so I think what Allison, to kind of circle back to the book here, is saying is that some of those market mechanisms in a free market, there might be a lot more people saving to offset future tax liabilities. But in a market that's kind of muckied up with a bunch of government intervention and uncertainty, that just makes that more difficult to do. And so we might not see some of the changes that we should make to our lives, is what I think Allison would be arguing. Okay, chapter 10. Let me open the floor again. Chapter 10. Anything else to say our piece on? Okay. So we'll do that. So chapter 11 is due tomorrow for fair value accounting and wealth destruction. I think we'll do a little mark to market on that one. And then you've got the rest of the due dates in there as well. So we'll pick up there on that one. So to end up our class time, I just wanted to introduce a little bit of the chapter. It's really the ongoing theme that we've had for this material. And that is conflict of interest and moral hazard. So this chapter is going to get into some of the different laws that were passed. So I've got some videos. Again, a lot of it's reading comprehension. So a conflict of interest, can somebody put into words what you'd say is a conflict of interest? How would you characterize that? Conflict of interest. I'll look for a regular hand, or maybe we should, let's have you chat box. All right, what is a conflict of interest? Let's chat box that. And then I'll put Jeremiah on the hot seat if he's up for it, to verbalize his first after, maybe you can even read a little bit of what somebody writes here. All right, principal of a school who's on a school board. 2 goals or positives that are contradicting each other. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about the positives part. What did you mean by that, Lawson? I'm just curious what you had in mind in terms of positives. You can unmute if you just want to speak your piece.
I don't know. I just I thought 2 positive ways of thinking. 2 things that you want maybe that are conflicting with each other. You can't have them both. Okay. So positive possibly for you, or one might work. I guess I wanted to be clear because some of it could be a negative and a positive mixed together. Something that, your company wants to make money, but you like to have new paper at your house. And so you steal a ream of paper from your house because it's a positive for you. And it's not very likely that the negative is going to be very big for the company. This is a multi-million-dollar company. Well, they're not going to miss a ream of paper, right? And so if we have everybody stealing a ream of paper, it might start to be a little bit more. Jeremiah, let me give you an opportunity to, what's conflict of interest mean to you?
Well, I thought of court of law, being on a jury, having that, but I think.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
Being like unbiased, or being biased towards something, and then the result changes because of your being biased.
Okay, so bringing your bias into the equation. Okay, good. Let's see, Olivia, like if it's a family to a business. So family, you might have some family things that get in the way of maybe the profits of the business or something like that. If you have a brother and sister that work together, and so it's more important for you to maintain your relationship with your sibling than it is to do whatever needs to be done. Like maybe you need to fire them would be a good example. Your sister really, goofed off and came in drunk and was high on coke, but you don't want to tell other people at your company that you knew this. Whereas if you didn't really know your sister the way you did, if it was just another coworker, you might have busted her right away, right? So that could be a conflict of interest. Good. All right. Yeah. Family member with financial advisor. That's always a classic. Trying to give you financial advice. I'm a teacher who's also a coach. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one, Isaac. So you need to pass to play in the big game coming up on Sunday. And so, yeah, you failed this exam, but I'll offer you a little extra credit here to get you up to a D so that my starting quarterback can play. Yeah, that's a good one. Two people have different opinions on certain things. I don't know if the opinion thing, I don't know if you got an example in mind, Aaron, or what were you thinking with your opinions? It could work. I'm just not sure I'm seeing what you're
So
thinking.
like, if somebody had an opinion to, say your partner's in a business or something, and somebody had an opinion on we should do this to better our business, and then the other person disagreed and had a different opinion on how to better their business, then it's a conflict of interest.
Okay. So that's a good one. I'm glad you elaborated on that. So I would say it's possible to have a conflict of, and maybe this would be more like a conflict of opinion, but you're both trying to maximize profits. It's just one person thinks option A would be better and option B would be better, and that's the conflict. That's not really the conflict of interest we're talking about here. They have a shared goal, but they just want to do it differently. So that's a good way to kind of bring up how this is a little bit different. And certainly some of you kind of made like the principal agent problem as part of this too. Okay, so the book brings up economies of scale and economies of scope as ways to help minimize or mitigate the interest. So I'm curious, going to the chat box, who's got economies of scale? I'd like all of you to have that term right off the top of your head. Economies of scale. Oh, Daniel's got something here. Long run average cost goes down over time. No, your last word there, you were real close. And JC's kind of finishing up, as you increase quantity. So it's not just over time, but it's rather even in the course of a day, you might be able to do 100,000 units or 500,000 units. And by doing more units, you're using the equipment time more efficiently. And so the average cost is declining. So it's more about the volume with economies of scale. And how about economies of scope? Economies of scope. All right, so good, Daniel. The different products are diversifying. So again, you kind of get it for similar reasons, that increasing the scale of production. So, but instead of just increasing more product, you're able to maybe better leverage your management staff and some of your accounting functions and legal functions or whatever. And you can offer two products at a cost cheaper than if you were to start a new business separately, or to start let's say two buildings of making a product. That making the two together can be done at a cheaper cost than making them apart. And so economies of scope is right in line with what you guys are saying. Doing different products, you're able to drive down, it's still driving down long run average cost. And so tomorrow we'll kind of start in with those conflicts of interest and how economies of scale and scope can play into that. So mark your calendars, you're getting 5 minutes out early today. There you go. I'll keep live on here. And has anybody heard? The school hasn't made any announcements otherwise. I assume it's business as usual tomorrow. Yeah. Okay. That's what I figured. And I looked at the temperature because I'm tempted to go ice fishing. I went ice fishing, you guys, for the first time I've gone ice fishing in 35, maybe plus years. And I caught some crappie on Lake Melbourne through the ice. And it was super scary. I got some pictures I'll show you. Maybe I'll show you tomorrow if you remember. Of the ice is actually, because it didn't freeze that much. And I wasn't out there for long. My fishing buddy's like basically crazy. And he walked out on the ice where it was cracked in 2 different spots. And so he's out on the ice, drilled the hole, and tied a rope to the shore. So in case it fell around him, he could pull himself in. So anyway, I did that for the first time. I can show you later, but otherwise the weather looks like we might even have some sunshine tomorrow, and we'll be in the single digits. So we'll see you, plan on here at class tomorrow unless you hear otherwise, or